Whenever you see me break out a music stand or something to preach from, means I am not that confident in the sermon today, usually because I hate the passage from which I'm preaching. And you may have taken notice during Tom's reading, there's a lot to unpack in this passage. So, thus, I need my notes for today. The other day, I was reserving a picnic shelter for an event we're going to be having in the fall with Emmaus Homes, and getting everything taken care of, and I clicked purchase, and up came this 3-page document with all of the terms of agreement and all of the fine print. Did I read it? No, I did not read it. Whenever you download an app onto your phone and the terms of service come up and you have to press accept before it goes on, how many of you actually read that? No. How many, when you buy a car or purchase your home, read every single page they put in front of you before you signed it? How many of you actually read those pages? Good. I'm not the only one. Or you're just too shy or embarrassed to admit you're very thorough. Because if you were willing to read all of those terms of agreement, if you're willing to read all of that fine print, I'd be impressed. And I would actually be pretty proud of you, because I probably should be more careful on what I am choosing to sign or agree to. I have been caught unaware, and maybe this has happened to you. I got a credit card statement, and on the credit card statement, I noticed this non-activity fee. And I went, I never agreed to a non-activity fee. And so I called them, and they said, oh, yeah, we sent you a little notice that we were going to start charging that, and if you don't want the charge, then write back to us, and we won't have that charge on there. I'm not going to read that document. It was 8 pages long. But it can get you into trouble, missing that fine print. Now, today, the sermon's going to be a little dense. So I wanted to start with a little humor. So I found a couple examples of some fine print that I found very interesting. Go ahead, Brian. Some of this may be hard to read. All right, here's a tag on a piece of article. Do not bleach, do not iron, do not dry clean, do not tumble dry, do not wash. What are you supposed to do? Next one. Gluten-free chocolate chip cookie. Fine print. This product contains gluten. And then this one's really hard to see. It looks like free beer, but it actually says free Wi-Fi, great beer. That's a pretty clever use of fine print. Thank you, Brian. Now, sometimes when you don't read the fine print, you can find out that you signed up for something that you really weren't sure you really wanted to sign up for. And unfortunately, as we learned today with today's reading, discipleship can be the same way. We sign up for things we didn't really know we were signing up for. So let's take a look at this passage. And as you're listening along or reading along as Tom read it, you might be saying, wait, Jesus said that? That's what Jesus actually said? And if he said that, what did he mean by that? So we're going to go slowly through this passage to help us all understand it a little bit more. And so I'm going to refer to specific passages today. But I want to get to the core. What is Jesus trying to say in this passage? What is he saying to his disciples? Now, this passage takes place not long or as part of the dialogue that I talked about last week, where Jesus is sending the disciples out into the villages of Galilee to preach and heal and serve and spread the gospel on his behalf. This passage is part of further instructions to the disciples as they go forward. And he warns them about the various rejections that they were likely to receive. And the passage then begins in verse 24. Jesus tells the disciples, "The student is not above the teacher, nor a servant above his master." Now, I do think this verse is important to kind of unpack, because I do think it unlocks a little bit of meaning of the rest of the passage. And I did some research on this and read some commentaries. And ultimately what Jesus is saying here is the same things that the teacher must endure, or the master who would have to endure, the students or the servants would have to endure as well. Basically saying to the 12, the same level of rejection and persecution that Jesus would face, the disciples needed to be willing to face that same level of persecution as well. And they would. Then, to verse 34, we're going to jump ahead. This is one that gives us a lot of pause, because it does not seem like something Jesus would say. "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." Now that seems very out of character for what we know about Jesus. And when we think of Jesus, it's hard not to think of the angels appearing to the shepherds when Jesus was born. "I bring you glad tidings of peace and joy." But here we have Jesus saying, "I did not come to bring peace, but instead a sword." So again, what is Jesus trying to tell the disciples here? Now, first, the symbol of a sword. Now, when we hear the word sword, or we think of a sword today, we usually associate it with violence. We associate it with military action. But sword in biblical terms was much different than that. The sword in biblical times was much more a symbol of division, of dividing something in half, than it was about violence. Go ahead and go up. This is a quote I found from Douglas Hare in his commentary on Matthew. "Matthew uses sword, a powerful metaphor for the way a community can be split by the preaching of the gospel. The community here in question is the family." Now, when we talk about family, we talk about this passage, we're going to start getting to some really uncomfortable things that more uncomfortable things that Jesus says. So Jesus here is not talking about, "I'm coming to bring violence," but "I'm coming to bring division." But I assert that this is not necessarily Jesus' intention to bring division, but more of an inevitable outcome of preaching the gospel. And I want to get more into that a little bit. Now, it was not the goal of Jesus to divide families. Certainly seems like it when we read this, but it was not his goal to divide families. This is a promise to the disciples as they're going out, that if they accept this task, if they sign on to these terms of agreement, your family is going to be divided. Or in other words, they're not going to understand why you're willing to risk your life for me. And keep in mind of when this was originally preached. The disciples, as they chose to follow Jesus, had to leave their family behind, follow Jesus all the way to Jerusalem, where they themselves could have been arrested and put to death as well. And after Jesus was resurrected, it's not like things got suddenly better for the disciples either. They were hunted, they were martyred. And Jesus here promises them, these are things that your family may not understand. Your family may be divided over your answer to my call. Now, faith matters can divide families now as well. Certainly did back then, because following Jesus was very, very controversial. Now, I had a roommate in seminary. He wasn't a seminary student, but I had a roommate I didn't know him very well. He needed a roommate. I needed a roommate. We were both poor, and we couldn't pay rent ourselves. But I noticed after living with him, his parents never came to visit. Parents hardly ever called him. Every once in a while, he'd get a call out of the blue moon. And I just kind of asked him one day out of curiosity about his relationship with his parents. And it turns out that he grew up in a cult, for lack of a better word. He grew up in a cult. And as he got older and started reading Scripture on his own, he realized that the stuff that was being preached by this figurehead, who his parents and the other people worshipped, didn't line up with Scripture. And so he decided, once he turned 18, that he would leave the cult. Well, one thing about cults is, generally speaking, the one big mistake you can make in a cult is to leave. That typically is how they keep people in the cult, is by fear. If you leave the cult, if you are an apostate, there's no hope for you. You're beyond salvation. You're going to hell. So his parents believed he was going to hell. And they would tell him that from time to time as well, too. But he thought it was way too much, it was too important for him to follow the truth of the gospel than to just cling to his parents and appease his parents. He had to do what was true. And he had to pursue the truth of the gospel instead of staying with his parents and just appeasing them and keeping them happy and going down a road he didn't want to go down. Now, he has tried to get them out of the cult over the years. I'm not sure where that's gone. I haven't talked to him in quite some time. But imagine that pain of knowing that your parents think you're going to hell and there's no hope for your salvation because he chose the gospel. Following the gospel can still cause division, even within families. Go to verse 37. Here is a very happy Father's Day passage. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And I know I have read this passage before, and I know other people who have as well, and they hear this and they think, well, I guess I'm not worthy. Guess I'm not worthy. And I get it. And I felt that way myself as well. Could I love my son less than something else? Is that what Jesus is asking me to do? But in a similar situation that which Lyle did is a similar situation to what the disciples were faced with as well. In this time, Jesus needed them to follow him. Because without them, the church wasn't going to exist. So they needed to follow him. And if they decided, you know what, my parents really want me to stay home and they're really going to be angry with me if I go with you, so I'm just going to stay home. If the disciples decided that, we would not be here. They needed to choose the call of Jesus, even over their family. So Jesus was using harsh, strong language, no doubt, no question. But he is not saying, don't love your parents, don't love your children. It's just meaning, he said this to his disciples, your call to me is more important than anything else. And if you cling to anything else, I'm going to have to call somebody else to do the task. So, we have the sword and we have family discord. This is Jesus warning about division. And I hope it doesn't sound as severe as it first did when you heard it. However, the fine print is still not Go to the next slide. We're going to start going through these a little quicker. Whoever does not take up their cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Now, the disciples would have heard this and they understood what the cross was. Even though Jesus had not been crucified yet, they understood that the cross meant Roman crucifixion, capital punishment. They were going to get arrested, tried, and be put to death. And he's telling the disciples, unless you are willing to risk death on my behalf, you're not worthy to go on this call with me. They had to be worthy to accept every possible consequence that could happen to them if they followed Jesus, which included, and many were, arrested, put to death. Peter, the most prominent of the disciples, after Jesus had been resurrected and after Peter had been preaching, though it's not recorded in Acts, Peter was martyred, would be arrested, and put to death as well. They needed to be willing to take up that cross and follow Jesus. And if they weren't able to do that, we would not be here worshiping together. And we too also must be willing to accept the consequences of serving God. Now, we live in a time where, in a culture where being put to death because you came to church here this morning is unlikely, to say the least. It's unlikely. But you have to be willing to accept that there may be some consequences to your decision to embrace and be Jesus and to follow Jesus. And then verse 39, Jesus says, whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Basically, I think Jesus is saying here, self-preservation is not our task. Self-interest is not our task. God's interest and the interest of our neighbors, we are called to love. Not to love ourselves, but to love God and to love neighbors. Now, within all of these warnings, we still have good news. And it can get very lost in this passage, which is very difficult to dissect. So I want to bring our attention to the piece of good news. And it's actually 3 verses, starting with verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. Go ahead. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. This is the part of the passage I want to leave you with. This is the fine print of an otherwise very difficult to understand and grasp and kind of scary passage. That the good news in the fine print can easily get lost. But here it is. God cares for us so much. Your hairs are numbered. And I'm looking at Tim as I said that, and I'm sorry, Tim. Tim's very much like me. That was not intentional, Tim. It just happened that way. You are my bald brother, and I love you. So we belong to a fraternity. But our hairs are numbered. God cares for us. God weeps when a sparrow falls to the ground, and we are worth so much more than a sparrow. So God is giving us these warnings, giving us these instructions, but he's doing so almost with a broken heart himself. Saying, I know this is going to be really hard for you, but you're going to have to do it. And especially in that context, they needed to do it. It would be irresponsible for Jesus to tell his disciples, hey, let's go camping. It'll be great. We'll go fishing. Everything will be fun. And say nothing about the possibility that they could be arrested, hated, persecuted, and killed. So Jesus tells him the realistic the realistic consequences of what might happen by choosing to follow him. Now, in closing, in our culture today, division is everywhere. We see it, we live in it. It fills a lot of us with a lot of dread, a lot of frustration because of all the division. And I'm going to say, and I'm going to assert, and I know some pastors will disagree with me, but I feel that our call today is different than what the call of the disciples back then was. Our call is different. It's still risky, but it's different. Our call now, as I believe, is to try to bring peace into a divided world. Is to try to bring peace into a divided world. Is to try to be Christ to the people around us. And the people around us already feel divided. Many people are experiencing division in their families. Nowadays, it's less about faith matters and more about politics. But the very families are feeling divided. Our job, our responsibility, our call now is different than it was for the disciples then, because the world is completely different now than it was then. Our call now, and it is still a risky call, and it involves stepping out, and people are going to notice us. People may not like the message we try to bring, but our job is to try to bring peace to an otherwise divided world. Now, I found a great example of this in a book by Daniel Goleman called Emotional Intelligence. And he retells the story that he was told by an American soldier in Vietnam. As he was fighting in Vietnam, they were involved in a skirmish with the Vietnamese in a rice field. And divided in the rice field was this very small dirt path. On one side you had the American soldiers, on the other side you had the Vietnamese. As they were fighting and as they were shooting at each other, 6 Buddhist monks started walking down that path. And as they approached the battle, they didn't blink, they didn't pause, they didn't look to the left, they didn't look to the right, they just kept walking. And as they got closer to the fighting, people noticed the monks and began to stop shooting to let them slowly pass. And after they passed, something pretty incredible happened. No one felt like fighting anymore. And both sides just went back to their barracks or wherever they would go. But the fighting ceased after that, for that particular battle. Nobody shot at them, but no one felt like fighting. Everyone stopped. Now, I don't know what each specific person here is called to specifically do. The call for each of us is different. But the call is going to have some sort of risk involved with it. The call is going to have some opportunities for us to say some things that someone else may not like to hear. But we are called to say them. We're called to do it. We're called to bring some sort of peace and reconciliation to the world when it needs it. And the discipleship is scary. That is, I think, the essential fine print of discipleship, is that at times it is scary. But doubt is not the opposite of faith. I believe fear is the opposite of faith. And to be truly disciples, we need to overcome fear. We need to overcome fear of someone being upset with us, especially a family member. We need to be able to overcome that fear that someone might not agree with what we truly believe. But with faith, the fine print of discipleship can seem a lot less costly. Amen.